together now, all together now, all together now, in no man's land, together, all together now, all together now, all together now, in no man's land. Same old story again. All those tears shed in vain. Nothing won, nothing gained. Only hope remains. All together now. All together now. All together now. In no man's land, together, all together now, all together now, all together now, in no man's land, together, all together now, all together now.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 3 of the Chris Mitchell podcast. If you missed the previous show, it was with Katie Fanning, aka Paris. What an amazing show. What an amazing woman. If you missed that, please go and check it out. It's also on my Odyssey channel. So, guys, please go and check that out if you haven't seen it. Episode 1 was the Highland Division. Some great lads there facing a bit of prosecution from the law. That's an interesting show. Hopefully speak to more of those guys in the future. But episode 3, looking forward to this. Let's get into it. Please, Alek, over to you. Introduce yourself.
Good evening. Thanks for inviting me on. So I am a British nationalist. I live in Yorkshire. I've worked with a variety of organisations, variety of people. Latest thing I did of interest was in Skegness this Saturday. I was in the army for 6 years, and it was after that that I started becoming active in politics.
Good little intro there, mate. We'll delve straight into it. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about your we'll talk about your early days first, bro. Like growing up in Yorkshire. How was that for you, first and foremost?
Well, what might surprise some people, I did not actually grow up in Yorkshire. Some people will be able to tell from the accent. Believe it or not, I actually grew up in Australia. My parents are
Really?
English through and through, but I actually
Oh,
grew
were you
up
actually born in Australia?
there, in Adelaide, in South Australia.
Oh, no, man. Go on.
And then when I was 19, that was when I moved to England. And it was that same year that I then joined the army. 6 years in the army. Some of that was based in Germany. Most of it was based in Salisbury Plain with 5 rifles. Went to Estonia quite a bit as well. Went there 3 times. So yeah, I've been about a bit. I mean, that wasn't the only place, but that's the place I probably went the most while I was in the army. And since I came out, I've lived in Yorkshire.
No, so let's just pick up a little bit on the Australia there. I think some people might be interested to know. You got any interesting stories? You know, it doesn't have to be political. Anything of note that you want to talk about of your child or in your teens whilst in Australia?
To be honest, there's not much that's really that interesting. In terms of like where I saw myself going when I was younger.
Hmm.
Uh, at one point, I wanted to become an architect, and then another point, I sort of wanted to become a doctor. I did briefly go to university. I didn't really enjoy it.
Hmm.
I found that what I was doing there, whilst it was very interesting, I found it, and this is just my personal opinion, I found it to be like I was spending an awful lot of money in terms of fees, and I wasn't really getting much out of it that I couldn't have just read and learnt on my own. So consequently, I just went to work instead.
Yeah, I think a
And
lot of
then,
people. Go on, sorry.
oh no, sorry, what were you saying?
No, just saying that a lot of people would be sharing that sentiment here. I mean, never interested me. I just went to college and learnt a trade when I left school. And I had all of them, a lot of mates went to university, spent extortionate amount of money, and they're not even working in that specific field.
I mean, I'm of the opinion now, and have been for quite some time, that university is something that should exist if it leads to a particular kind of employment.
Yeah,
I wouldn't necessarily encourage people to study things for the sake of studying them. I think that's something a lot of people do, because at the end of the day, you can study if you want to study something for its own sake. That's something you can do in your own time, and I know of an awful lot of people who go to university, study things that don't necessarily lead them directly into employment, and they
yeah,
find that after 3 or 4 years, they're in exactly the same position they were at the start, except now they're 40, 50,000 in debt, however much it is. But they're still getting the same job and the same wage as they would if they hadn't gone, which is really bad. But I think that's kind of the lesson is, think about what you're doing and whether it's actually going to be productive for you.
agreed. I mean, I presume you went to university in Australia before, yeah? Just to
Yeah.
clarify. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
What was the curriculum like in Australia? Is it very much different here? Is it? I mean, how old are you now? Sorry.
I'm 27 now.
Okay, 27. So obviously it's got worse as we've got older. But yeah, what do you remember about the curriculum back then? Was there a lot of brainwashing, anti-white rhetoric that
I
we're
mean,
facing currently right now?
looking back, I would say that yeah, looking back, it was quite left wing. However, at the time, I didn't necessarily perceive it that way. I know that sort of brainwashing in education is something that is a really big issue, and it's something that's always talked about. But
Mm.
what I've also noticed is that a huge number of very many totally normal people come to their own conclusions on these things anyway. And when they grow up and when they get a bit older, they look back and think, well, that was a very simplistic thing to be telling me, or well, that wasn't necessarily true. I mean, I didn't really grow up ideologically motivated in any way. I think, to be honest, my political views were probably more shaped by the military than anything else. It wasn't anything before that.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, like I remember in school, yeah, there was looking back. I am looking back. Yeah, there was quite not as much as now. Not with all the pro LGBT nonsense that's going on and all that crap. But yeah, back then there was still, 14 years ago left school. No, 16 years ago, something like that. Yeah, and but I wasn't really political back then. Back then, I mean, I knew what was going on. I was still quite. I still would say I was an English nationalist, but just not to the extent I am now, because I actually have been out there making noise, mate. Because being from Birmingham, bro, I was already a minority in
Yeah.
Birmingham many years ago. Do you know what I mean? So I already hated what my city had become. But back then, I was an Ngudu sort of supporter. I still am to a degree. Don't get me wrong. I still think we can use football to our benefit. We can discuss that later on. But back then, yeah, I was more into my sports and football rather than caring about politics. I just saw it as a boring topic. But now, like, I think it's our life, it's our duty to discuss the problems that we face in this day and age.
Yeah. I mean, when I was sort of saying about, it's made me think of something when I was saying about how like the army sort of shaped my political views more than anything, because after university, that was probably the next significant thing I did.
Yeah, sorry, before we go on to the army, what made you make that leap? You were in university, you're in Australia. What has then got into your head saying, okay, I'm going to move to England, I'm going to go to the country where my mother was born, and I'm going to be in the army?
It's very difficult to actually explain that. Um, I think I just felt like I would be more content and more at home living here. And from the moment I started living here, I did. And it was sort of at that point I sort of thought, well, I'll go into the army. And something I've always advocated, and I always will for the rest of my life, is I've always believed in some form of national service or conscription. And a lot of people find it really odd, even though it's totally true, when I say to them that, when they say, well, what made you join the army? It's like, well, because now I'm not a hypocrite, because I'm still going to advocate for that, but all I'm now really asking people to do is to do exactly what I did. I'm not sitting there saying, well, I didn't do it, but you should. So I'm happy with that. I got what I want.
Yeah, but do you think it should be mandatory that we should all, the men obviously, should do national service?
I do, yes.
You would, yeah.
And I know that people sort of say, oh, well, I know people talk about politics and how politics plays into it. But I've said this for a while, that if a nationalist minded young man comes to me and sort of says, what would a nationalist do? I will say to him, go and do some time in the army or the military or something like that. That is my advice for what are the sorts of things that a nationalist should do. And when I explain, if you ask me about like how the army shaped my political views, it'll become apparent why I think that.
Well, would you also you make an argument that, especially being a young lad coming out of school, we're a bit hyper. I remember us as youngsters, a lot of us just obviously choosing the nightclubbing routes at the time. You could make an argument that this could discipline you for the rest of your life, couldn't you, though, to be fair?
Yeah, I absolutely would make that argument, because what it does is it shows you a better way of living, and it shows you what pride and self-respect can actually do. Because in my view, a large part of the reason why so many young men are suffering today is from a lack of those two things. It's not because there's anything wrong with them. It's not because it's not because they're garbage in any way, despite a lot of people maybe telling them they are. All you need to succeed in life is pride, self-respect, and discipline.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. However, what I will push back on, because a lot of nationalists obviously don't agree with, most notably the word brother wars and just going to wars in general. Like, I obviously think it's a lot of wars are for. I'm not as clued up as a lot of people, obviously, but a lot of people believe that war is for Zionist causes. I mean, what's your advice to those youngsters or anyone actually thinking about going that are being put off by other nationalists saying these kind of things to them?
What I will say is that when you're in the military, you won't live an ideologically motivated life. Most people in the world, in my view, do not see the world through the prism of ideology. Perhaps I perhaps do, but I also accept that the overwhelming majority of people don't. And I know when people talk about brother wars, whether it's like World War One, World War Two, for the people involved in those things, it was not an ideological struggle. It was an existential struggle. People weren't sitting on battlefields having debates over the rights and wrongs of ideology. And when I sort of took, in terms of like how the military shaped my political views, it's because when you're in the military, you have to live in what I would describe as a very, I would have to describe it as a very fascist way, because in a sense of that's, people understand what fascism is. I'm not saying good or bad, but people understand fascism as militaristic, very, shall we say, uniform in terms of how you're expected to be, not much individualism, not much tolerance for, minorities, diversity, that sort of thing. But when you're in the military, you actually have to live like that. And so you basically live in a very fascist way without having any sort of ideological view on it at all. And because you can't do things like grift, you can't do things like allow other people to carry you, because you will very quickly be despised by the majority of people. You can't lie, you can't cheat, you can't steal, because if you do, you will be socially ostracized and you will be penalized for doing it. You can't behave with a lack of self respect, because if you do, nobody else will ever respect you and you'll never get anywhere. And so you are forced to live in that way. And by doing that, you accomplish things that you would never normally be able to accomplish. And so through my time in the army, that was that was when, over a course of 3 or 4 years, I left effectively thinking, how the military is, that is how society should be, that is how British people should be. And so when a lot of nationalists say, oh, but if you're in the army, you are fighting Zionist wars, you are fighting brother wars, whether that's true or not, the way I look at it is, if you want to be a nationalist and if you actually want to live by the principles you're espousing, then the only way to do it without hypocrisy is to put yourself in that environment. It's like a lot of the people, if you go back to the 1920s and the 1930s and you look at all the nationalist movements and the fascist movements, again, not talking about an ideological point of view, but if you look at them, a lot of the people in those movements and in those organizations, a lot of what they did wasn't guided by ideology. It was guided by things like camaraderie, brotherhood. It was effectively the imposition of military virtue on society. And so it enabled people to accomplish things and to work together to accomplish things in ways that were previously impossible. And people, in the military, you actually do get true equality. I know a lot of left-wing people say, well, the goal is equality, but in a militarized way of life, that's exactly what you get. But instead of getting equal outcome, what you get is a better form of equality, which is fairness. Fairness in the sense of, you are judged based upon what you do. You are treated the way you deserve to be treated. And if people go out of their way to make themselves different from other people, they are treated differently as a result. And so if you want to be part of the group and you want to be a functional part of that society, then you sort of have to behave in a very collectivized way. So that is why, when I say the military did more to shape my political views, that's why. Sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded.
No, man, honestly, really, really interesting listening to that. But also, there might just slightly change, but there could be some people, that's watching this. I've been like a boxer since I was 6, 7 years old, or in another martial arts sport, and
oh yeah,
they pretty much probably say I feel the same with you, but I'm not out there like doing some of the things you might be doing.
No, but to be honest, that I can respect that. I mean, the army, boxing's a big thing in the army, and because it's seen as like a very military type sport, in that it's like, I mean, it's not something I ever did. I'm not the sort of person whose build and physique was ever good for it, but it's because it's all very very much about controlled aggression, discipline. There's it gives you some sort of pride in yourself, so I can absolutely respect that, and good for you for doing it.
Yeah, fair play. I mean, right, let's talk about the army days. So in fact, I'll go on to the question. I mean, I know a few people, but do they not have those like diversity quotas and all the other quotas in the army in this day and age?
Yes, that is a thing as far as I'm aware, but Something I noticed in the army, I mean, it might have been different as well for me because I was in the infantry, and the army infantry is probably, even though it's quite, diverse, it's probably what you would call the least left wing of any part of the armed forces. But what I observed is that yes, equality and diversity seminars were a thing, equality and diversity mandatory lectures were a thing, but virtually everybody, including people who were foreign, had no interest in it. They saw it as rubbish. They saw it as weak and pathetic. If people were to do things like play the race card, they would very quickly be marked as weak or in some way, a grifter or a complainer. Because in the military, you do actually, for the overwhelming majority of the time, get treated pretty fairly. You get treated based on how good you are at doing things.
So you
And
wouldn't be able to, hold a conversation with your fellow colleagues about the English for being potentially becoming, well, they probably will be becoming a minority. Would this conversation just be shot down?
no, it wouldn't. And what I will say is conversations that I personally had, and I'm not going to put any names or any
Yeah,
information because I'm sure you understand why.
of course. Yeah.
But I during my time in worked in environments where I could have conversations with some quite high ranking people, and we could have discussions about politics, and people could disagree with each other without there being any real animosity. But I remember a conversation I had with somebody who wasn't one of my immediate colleagues, but was quite high ranking, a high ranking officer. And the point I made was when they were talking about, equality and diversity. And the point I made was, I don't understand how it's possible to simultaneously create a state of equality whilst at the same time encouraging people to be as different as possible, through endless fixation on things like LGBT, ethnic identity, etc., etc. And the responses I got were along the lines of, yeah, like we agree. And obviously the Ministry of Defence would never agree, but people don't lie. And so, when you say you couldn't have conversations about these sorts of things, yeah, you absolutely could. You couldn't have conversations with entities like the MOD about these things,
Yeah.
but people in the military are by and large very normal. Yeah, I do remember once another conversation where it was a guy from outside the military. He was an MOD civil servant. Was explaining to a Nepalese clerk. He was explaining to him that if a white person was to racially abuse him, it would be racism. Whereas if a non white person was to racially abuse him, such as if the Nepalese guy was to racially abuse him, it would only be discrimination because apparently only white people could be guilty of racism. And after he explained this and left the room, these Nepalese guys and I were looking at each other with complete bewilderment as to what on earth he was going on about. It's people in the military they don't view the world through the prism of ideology because you don't live in an environment that necessarily allows you to do that. And so you just view the world through a prism of, well, nobody dislikes each other because we have to work with each other and we have to live with each other no matter what we do.
Yeah.
But you can disagree on things like politics and religion, and no one really bears any grudges.
What about the banter side of things? Like a lot of, especially like obviously you're more in a environment, and especially as I'm like working a factory like with welders. I'm a welder. We always have the banter, but obviously we can't let the directors hear because we could get done for racism. Yeah, how strict are they on the banter? Do you know what I mean? Where everyone's offended by everything these days.
Yeah,
it's just comedy, even if you're not against them. Everyone has a bit of comedy with this, don't they?
I mean, the banter, obviously, you've got to be careful who you're doing it in front of, but the banter is absolutely ruthless compared to
Yeah.
anything you'd probably find in a civilian workplace.
Oh,
I
really?
if you,
Have you
for
got have you got
example,
an example?
oh,
Sorry to put you on the spot. I
it's
do know.
very hard to it's very hard to give an example without saying something that could potentially amount to a public order offence. I'm just trying
Oh,
to
really?
think.
Okay.
Well, uh, recently I've seen like memes floating about on social media communities that are specifically for ex-military people, and what I'll say is this: the policy of joining those communities is that if you report anything to the provider, you get banned forever, because
Hmm.
it might just be one report that'll get the entire thing shut down because of how ruthless the banter is. But none of it is genuinely like hateful. It's just the banter is so brutal compared to anything you'd find anywhere else.
Did you ever see anyone that just couldn't handle that banter?
Yeah, like that does happen, but it's very, very rare because, and I mean, it depends what part of the military you're in, but I'd say in the infantry that is sort of non-existent. As in, you might get maybe one guy in 500 that is like that, because you will very quickly be annihilated if you
Hmm.
sort of are seen to be like weak. So if your response to banter is to do things like go and start complaining about it, because none of it will ever be genuinely, intended
Yeah.
hatefully, but if you're
Just so the
sort of
boys can have a
behaving,
bloody, so the boys can have a bloody laugh and take the piss out of each other.
oh yeah, like it's yeah, it's definitely like that. It was a nice environment to be in. I'm happy I left, but at the same time, there are lots of things I do miss, and sort of the banter and the camaraderie is definitely one, or definitely two things.
Oh, we'll discuss your best and worst moments shortly if you want to have that in your brain. But what I will ask you, what was your average typical daily routine? Talk to me from, okay, the moment you get up. I presume you're being I don't know how it works. You can tell me. I ain't been in that environment. Are you being woke up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning? Go from
Okay,
that until you go to bed. On an average day, I know some days will be different and some weeks may be different, but on an average day for you.
okay. So the average day, get myself up. This is not including basic training, which is kind of more like what you see on
But
TV.
you can get yourself up on an average day. They won't be in there screaming for
No,
you.
no. I get myself up about 6:30. Typically, you'd have PT. You do PT every morning in the
Yeah.
infantry every day. So that'd be typically 7:15, 7:30. You'd parade. You'd go do PT. You'd come back from PT. You'd then go and get changed, showered, whatever. You'd then parade and do work for the rest of the morning. Go to lunch, parade after lunch, do work after lunch. Sometimes there would be a lot of hurry up and wait, because if there wasn't specific stuff to do, then you would just be sat around waiting to be told something to do. My last 2 years I was in, I moved to a headquarters company, which meant that I worked with staff officers, which, remember I told you about the conversations that I had. That's how I ended up having those kinds of conversations with higher ranking people, because I worked with staff officers doing military intelligence tasks. It was really good. I really enjoyed that. Things were there was more work because there was never any sitting around hurry up and waiting. You had to proactively do things. You would just get told, I need you to make a PowerPoint on, let's say, I don't know, Russian air defense assets. And then, and they say, I need it by Friday. And you would just be left alone and expected to do it. You wouldn't have people checking on you every 5 minutes, but there would be hell to pay if you didn't do it. So but I liked that better, because I was more than happy to just be left alone to work. So it was kind of weird, because I had no rank at all, but I was pretty autonomous for the last 2 years, in that I would just be left alone to get on with stuff. So I'd still go to parades and do things like that, but somebody wasn't like following me around everywhere. I would just be left to get on with work, and then report to the people I was in charge of in the next office whenever I needed something, or if they
Yeah.
needed me for something, etc.
Yeah, that sounds good. I love being left alone at work, but it's a bit different in your environment to mine, to be fair.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, go on, finish what you're
Oh
going to say.
no. Sorry, you. I think you were about to ask me something.
Yeah, just as I previously mentioned, unless you need a bit more thinking time, some of your we'll go with some of your best memories so far because that should be easier to think of. Any best memories that come into your mind, and things that you miss, for example.
Best memories. They're not really military things. They're just things I did whilst in
Yeah,
the
yeah, that's
military.
fine. That's fine.
Best memories. Uh, Went on a mountaineering trip with a bunch of guys in Corsica. That was really nice. That was about a week. We went. There was a trail called the GR20. We went on around southern Corsica. That was really lovely.
Mm.
Um, did a sailing expedition around Cyprus. That was lovely as well. Went to America because we went to Canada. There's a training unit in Alberta. We went there for a few months, and because of the way the calendar was, we ended up with about 10 days off. So we went to America across the border to Montana for 4th of July weekend. That was really good.
Nice. And the things you miss from the army.
Probably some just seeing the mental things that people do, because looking back they are like quite funny. Some of them I couldn't even like repeat on here because they're so mental, but some of the mental things people do, the banter, I miss.
Yeah. And okay, is there any of the worst memories, like all stuff that you would hate to relive again?
I can think of some of the most horrible like places that I went. I think probably some of the most like miserable experiences are probably actually in the UK. Um, there's a place called Otterburn. It's near the border of Scotland, and it's a training area. And we went there when I was in basic training to do a final exercise, which is about 10 days long. And it's absolutely barren, absolutely godforsaken. And because of the way the calendar went, it was the beginning of February when we went, so it was freezing cold, and it rained. It rained and sleeted constantly for the entire 10 days. So it was soaked through in like freezing conditions for 10 days. That's probably like the most miserable I can think of.
And that was the Scottish summer for you.
Yeah, that was absolutely horrible. Even though it's in the UK, that is probably the most miserable experience.
Do you still keep in touch with anyone from the army?
Oh yeah, I do.
What about have they? Go on, finish off.
I was going to say some of them are aware of my political activities.
That was the next question.
Yeah, some of them are aware. Others we don't really talk about it, not because we agree or disagree, but just because it's not something that we really have an interest in talking about. I don't have any sort of grievances with anyone. I don't think I still keep in touch. It's a lot. It's people I probably will keep in touch with for years.
Has any of these came on a march? It doesn't matter what organisation, or the recent one that you've just done, or plan to.
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm not going to begrudge anybody for that, even if they agree with it, because there are rules while you're in the military, and you aren't allowed to get in to do things like go on political marches, and you're not allowed to do things, as far as I'm aware, you're not allowed to join political parties either. So I can't begrudge people in the military for sort of saying,
so they're still in the military. Yeah, the people you're speaking to. Yeah. Has there anyone left though in the military similar to you and have joined into like nationalism in any way, shape, or form that you know of? Anyway?
I think a lot of people in the military and who come out of it are very, very nationalistic without necessarily perceiving it in that way. Like if you were to ask them, what are your views on, immigration? What are your views on the government? What are your views on minorities? What are your views on, Marxism or the hard left, etc., etc.?
Yeah.
the overwhelming majority of them will have the exact same views as us, not necessarily for ideological reasons. And look, they're not necessarily going to be interested in being sold any sort of ideology, but that they will by and large tend to say things like, if you were to show them a picture of people like, I don't know, stand up to racism or whatever, by and large they're going to say, well, they look like freaks. If you were to say to them, oh, the government's doing this with, in the channel, letting all these dinghies across, they'll probably say, oh, what needs to happen is things that I can't say because it would amount to a criminal offence. It's like, it's not an ideologically motivated environment, but a lot of people who are in the forces, they aren't ideologically driven. But if you were to quantify their way of life and the things they think as an ideology, it would be very nationalist and sort of very, dare I say it, fascist, without necessarily trying to be.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, okay, we'll move on. But however, just the last thing on this, what made you leave and why did you leave the army? What was the reason behind it?
My motive to leave the army was my disgust with the government and with the political system. I didn't conceal that. I openly said that. Nobody would argue that I was wrong or that disagreed with that. I just sort of matter of factly said, look, I'm not happy with the way society is being run. I'm not going to continue to put myself at the disposal of a government that I hate. I never really liked it to begin with, but now, and when it came to that issue of national service, well, now I am not a hypocrite. I've done what is asked of me. I'm now in a position where I can fairly and honestly say, right, I've taken orders for this many years. Now I'm content that I've done what I need to do. I've got what I wanted. Now I'm going to go and do my own thing. But I straight up explain my reasons, and again, nobody begrudged me for them. Nobody argued against them.
How much notice do you have to give for that, Alek?
1 year.
So that's minimum. You have to give 1 year.
Yeah, you have to give 1 year's notice when you sign off. So
what about if you change your mind in that period? Can you stay on?
It depends on whether they want you to stay on. If you're someone who they don't really want, then if once you're signed off, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, thanks. We'll let you know when your time's up. They didn't want me to leave, and I understand why they didn't want me to leave. But because of the reasons I gave, I think they sort of knew that no amount of promotion offers or sort of whatever was going to make me stay, and they respected that. But yeah, you have to give 1 year's notice. But sometimes if the army is having cuts, personnel cuts, then once you've signed off, you won't be able to sign back on. As far as I'm aware at the moment, if you sign off, you can't sign back on.
Like 1 year notice, that's a bit like a lot can happen in that 1 year though, couldn't it?
A lot of people sign off as a way of sort of, if they feel they're not getting what they want. A lot of people do sign off because it's like it's the only thing you can do to basically get back at the army is to sign off. So a lot of people do it, and then when 6-9 months are gone, they then sort of think, "Oh right, well what the grievance has been sorted now, so I'll sign back on." That is a thing people do.
That's good. All right, well, yeah, well done, man. Interesting chat that was on the army. We will move on. So, after the army, what did you do? What happened?
So after the army, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I sort of mentally thought that I wanted to get involved in politics, but I moved up north, and the next sort of major thing that I did was probably then when I joined PA, which was towards the end of 2021.
Okay, I actually thought you said like at the start of the show that you joined other organisations. So PA was actually the first one you came
Yeah,
across.
PA was the first one I joined. I've sort of done things with other people and other organisations and help them do things. So you've muted yourself.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had a call just taking it off. Yeah, so PA, talk to me about PA. How did you actually find them? Obviously, when I found them, I think it was just I can't remember. I was in the Tommy Robinson move, and I spoke to Mark and Laura, and it kicked up a bit of fuss. But yeah, how did you first come across PA?
I came across them from seeing them mentioned in newspaper articles, and I thought, well, I seem to be broadly in agreement with most of what they're advocating for, which I still am, and so I went along to a couple of their events. I liked what the gist of it was, and what the objectives were, and sort of took it from there.
Yeah, so obviously we're going to talk about some big news shortly that was released by yourself. We weren't going to talk about it, but we will very shortly. Yeah, talk about some good memories you had in PA. I mean, I've got my grievances, but there were some decent memories. Yeah, any good memories that you had whilst you was in PA? I've seen some of your speeches actually when you was in PA, and we'll talk about your attire as well shortly, actually, because that's something that gets brought up in a few chats, don't it? But yeah, any good memories that you had within your time?
Well, if I'm honest, a lot of good memories. There's a lot of good people that I met, and a lot of good people I still know. Try to think of some of the best memories. The PA summer camp. That's it. I have a good memory from that.
Was that the one that was on the documentary, or was that?
No, that was the year before I was involved. I think
Right.
that might have been the one from 2021. The 2022 one I was on. I had some good memories from that. That was really nice.
Was that in Edale as well? Did you go to Edale, Derbyshire way?
Oh, I forget exactly where it was because I had a lift from somebody else, so I wasn't really looking at a map. But it was in the peaks.
Yeah. It was a grueling walk.
Yeah,
14, 15 miles.
And I really liked the sort of push to be doing more things like speeches, more sort of public things. I'm pleased that that was sort of the direction that things were going in.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so which one was your probably your highlight speech? Your for PA, that is. We'll talk obviously after your highlight speech, because there was quite a few that hit the ground running, weren't they? To be fair.
Well, the speech I did at the conference was the longest one I did. However, I don't necessarily think it was the best one I did. I think my favourite one that I did was probably the one in Hull at the beginning of this year.
Yeah. Is there a particular reason for that?
I think because it was the first time where we actually had an audience that was able to be interacted with in a meaningful way, as opposed to sort of doing a speech at a flash demo where maybe people who are listening are just people who happen to be there and sort of happen to agree with what's being said. That was the first time where there was an actual audience. Obviously, the PA conference speech predated that, and so did the one at the Yorkshire Forum at the beginning of the year. But it's very different when you're speaking to an audience that's already pretty much in complete agreement with you, which means that what you're doing is more of a lecture. It's very different when you're speaking to an audience of people who are broadly in agreement with what you're saying, but are sort of going to make up their mind as to what they think of you based upon how you conduct yourself and what you actually say, which I probably get more satisfaction out of.
What was the reception that you felt like you got on that day?
Good, really good. The fact that the media didn't actually want to print anything I actually said, that tells me a lot, because it tells me that they obviously didn't, because they thought if they did, people would agree with it. The media also seemed to like to propagate that I was somehow the organizer of it.
Right. I mean, the media do paint you as now. This is what I want to go into. This I've seen comments today, and to be honest, I didn't want to get involved in any comments about you today. I just wanted to keep this on the lowdown and just get the show done. But they call you the whole Hitler. First, what is your reaction to being labelled as the whole Hitler?
Well, I personally think that it didn't have the effect that the media intended for it to have. Because one, it is ridiculous. But two, I think their intention behind doing that was that it would create a situation whereby I would either immediately start apologizing or otherwise never ever want to appear in public again. It became apparent to me very quickly that it didn't have that effect on the readers, and it didn't have that effect on me either. And in fact, it seems that there's people that I actually met in Hull again because I went back to Hull to sort of help out with a big demo that was organised by another group of people. It wasn't anything to do with PA, and quite a few people remembered me as, oh, you were the whole Hitler. Oh yeah, good to see you again. So it didn't have the effect that the media thought it would have.
I mean, like, I'm going to push back a little bit here, mate. Yeah, just for devil's advocate. You say that, and I presume all this, the feedback you're getting is all positive on the ground, which is probably more important for you. But you can't deny there have been a few comments in Telegram circles. I have actually seen it today. I've actually had a mate tell me, why are you interviewing him for when he's dressing like fucking 1930s Hitler? So some people on our own side are thinking it though, bro.
Yeah, no, they are, and in fact, every time the media have spoken to me, like mainstream media, get in touch with me, one of the things they always seem to ask is, "Are you trying to look like Hitler, and why do you wear a coat?" And they seem really taken aback when I say to them, "Well, the reason I'm wearing a coat is because it's winter." And it might rain and it's cold, so wearing a coat is a thing that people actually do. And I find it quite funny how they obviously take a dig at the moustache, but obviously the moustache I've had for years. In fact, I grew it about a year after I joined the army, and there's old photos of me in the army with it. And in
Yeah.
fact, so did the wearing of suits and the wearing of coats. I've been doing that for about a decade. I think they seem to think that they do think that they like to claim that I'm doing it in order to look like certain people, but I'm afraid that the reason is much more banal. That is just how I look and how I dress. I'm not. If I were to say abandon that entirely and turn up in a tracksuit, the media would simply say I was an EDL thug. So I don't really. It's one of those situations where one, it's unwinnable, and so the only thing I can do is like, right, well, how do I want to present myself? Well, I'll present myself in a ordered, organized, disciplined way. So that is how I'll do it.
No, I think that's a very good answer. I mean, I don't really care, to be honest, but I just thought I'd ask the question because there will be the left watching this. You will have some media watching this, and obviously, the very few that have been saying it within our circle, I just wanted the answer directly for them. So,
No, well, it's up to them. I mean, they can think what they like of it. It's totally up
yeah.
to them. But no, I'm afraid the reasons are very banal.
What's your thoughts? Obviously, you've been doing a lot of speeches. What's your thoughts on addressing, the famous 1930s debates that gets said a lot over a lot of Telegram groups? So we'll start there. What's your thoughts on that topic?
Right. What I do think is that the overwhelming majority of people in society do not view the world through the prism of ideology. I personally do not think that the struggle that we're engaged in is necessarily an ideological struggle. What I see it as is a struggle between society and antisocial elements. Now, I think the ideology part is the fact that for me, Marxism most left-wing ideology, but Marxism in particular, in my opinion, is not so much an ideology as it is a manifestation of crime and antisocial behavior, which is why the hard left is always full of people that you would sort of otherwise describe as society's rejects or society's parasites. It's because it's a conglomeration of antisocial elements. And I think most people do not view this battle as an ideological battle. And so I think when it comes to World War II, 1930s, what I've discovered is that yes, people have certain views on it. They think wrong, or this was right, or that was right. But for the most part, normal people are sort of sick of debating things that happened beyond living memory ago, and they would much rather just fix the issues of today and debate the issues of today, and then worry about debate in history at a later time, for the same reason that most normal people, irrespective of their views on slavery, are absolutely sick of debating the rights and wrongs of it. Because at the end of the day, what difference does it make? What difference does it make to their current situation? And it's like, what difference does it make debating about things like World War II, the Holocaust? What difference does it make?
I completely agree. I do think, I just completely agree. I think we should be sticking with facts on what's going on today. Like a lot of my videos I done last year, the last series I done, it was all on demographics on the percentage of our country from just 1991 to today, showing them that we went from 98%, 95% in 91. And I think we're about, 74, 78%, something between them lines. I think those are the figures that we need to be pushing right now. We need to be, and like with all the migrants coming in at Dover, like we've got statistics coming out of our areas in the modern day. That is what we should be pushing as a message. Do you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, debating things that are dead and gone and are so are totally removed from modern society, I think it is a complete waste of time. It's something that you can do, but it's something that can only ever really be done in an academic sense, and debating it academically is something that can be done once the issues are fixed, and once you've got the society you want. That's when you start thinking about, well, let's academically debate things that happened before anybody was born. I think that because the time you're spending debating that is time you're not spending dealing with the issues that are affecting people right now.
Agreed. Just pretty much the same question, but to the JQ. I mean, I think there's quite a few English nationalists that's not really like even don't really bother debating 1930s Germany, but there's a lot of people that have been calling out the JQ in modern times. Do you think this is something that needs to be discussed more detail, or do you have the same kind of opinion?
I mean, I have a similar opinion in the sense of I think that's something to address once the other major issues are solved. What I think is that what I do believe is that I would like to live in a society which is as unified and coherent as possible. I do not believe that any one particular group of people, except perhaps Marxists, which, as I said, is I consider a conglomeration of society's rejects and parasites. I do not believe that any one particular group of people is to blame for any of these problems. In the sense of, could you remove a particular group of people and all of society's problems would disappear? No, you can't, because the world isn't as simple as that. And if that's what some people think, then they're going to be in for a major disappointment should they ever remove a particular group of people, because then society's problems will not disappear. In fact, it probably won't do very much at all. So I think that is a very naive view, and I have said this for some time. What I do think is that any sort of minority, any sort of group that is somehow different from what is the norm, I don't view them in a negative way at all. But what I do think is that if what you're trying to accomplish is to have a society which is as unified as possible, then anything which is a source of difference or division is effectively an obstacle that you have to overcome. And so there is a degree to which you can mitigate those divisions, and you can't mitigate those divisions by allowing people to have their own little cliques and their own little ways of doing things that isolate them and make them insular for the rest of society. You can integrate people in a way, but I mean, if people are inherently different or are sort of fundamentally different at a level that can't be changed, such as genetically, then the ways you can mitigate that are perhaps more limited. For example, you could say, right, no more immigration. But a lot of society's divisions can be mitigated in the same way that in the military, a lot of divisions are mitigated by making everything as uniform as possible.
Good answer. To be fair, mate. Right. I do want to talk about the march going forward, your plans going forward, but we have to address it, bro. Me and you did have an agreement. You can vouch for me on this. We agreed we were not going to talk about your resignation from PA. However, it has gone public since the recording of this show. I think my audience wouldn't appreciate if I didn't ask the question. I know there's been people asking me about you. I've seen people asking you questions in chats. I think you need to address it, bro. I mean, yeah, over to you.
So, I don't bear any grievance towards PA. There's a lot of good people in it, and I've enjoyed my time in it. What I do think is that going forward, there's going to have to be a variety of different strategies employed, and there's going to have to be a variety of organizations employed. Now, the cause of PA and the cause of nationalism are not the same thing. Both of those things might be working towards similar objectives, but those two causes are not the same thing. And so it became apparent to me that in order to facilitate the wider cause of nationalism, I could do better elsewhere, and outside of PA, I will be better able to move those objectives forward. If you were to ask me, well, what then was the nature of, not the disagreement, but the nature of why I left? What I could sort of summarize is, I would say, differences in view of the sorts of strategies that should be employed going forward.
Okay, well, what strategies do you think should be put forward?
I think that at present there is already a very large, already active, broadly nationalist community in Britain, or broadly right-wing community in Britain. And I feel that I'm in a position where I can try to mobilize more of those people to sort of work for the cause, because a lot of those people do not view the world ideologically. They have ideologies, but they do not view the world ideologically. And I feel that outside of PA, I feel that I can work with those people on a level that isn't ideologically driven, in order to, one, help them get what they want, and two, sort of help advance the wider cause of nationalism. Now, that's obviously PA's objective is, more to build, a tight, coherent community of people. But obviously, you can't simultaneously have a tight insular community and have a mass movement of people who are broadly in agreement on the same principles. So that's sort of the nature of the strategic difference, and why I'm now sort of pursuing my own objectives. I certainly don't dispute any of what PA is trying to achieve, and I wish them all the best in trying to achieve it.
Yeah, no, you'd be very respectful about them. To be fair, I mean, only answer as much as you can, man. But would you see there's a bit of a difference with PA and the people you're talking to is in class? Like, I do think PA attracts a lot, and I'm not disrespecting PA. Obviously, I know I've called about on many occasions, but they do attract the middle class. And from what I'm seeing from your lot, are the working class, and I do think both of them together are struggling to really unite as much as what we would like to. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been, and I think this isn't anything to do with PA. I think this issue in nationalism has existed for many decades. That there is definitely a disunity between. So the way I describe, I think there are two types of nationalists. Now, in simple terms, how what you would describe it, as you would say, as you've just said, you said working class nationalist, middle class nationalist. Now, how I would describe it is pretty much the same lines, but I would describe it as the beer hall nationalists and the ideological nationalists. Now, the beer hall nationalists are, in my view, the sort of people who want to live in a nationalist society but aren't interested in ideology. What they're interested in is living in a society which is, unified, in which they are treated with respect, in which they are politically represented. But what they want ideologically is basically nationalism, but they don't see the world in an ideological way. Now, what the ideological nationalist is, and this is typically more like middle class people, is they view the world through the prism of ideology. They see the struggle as an ideological struggle, not some sort of existential struggle. And by a way of using an analogy to describe the difference is the ideological nationalist. To use, in fact, I'll use World War II as a perfect example of the difference. So if you think about in World War II, on the Eastern Front, you had the battle between the Soviet Union and Germany. Now, for people like Hitler and Stalin, this was an ideological battle. It was like communism versus fascism. That's an ideological battle. But for the people in the Soviet army and the German army, it was not an ideological battle. It was an existential battle. They weren't going across battlefields thinking about the Communist Manifesto or Mein Kampf. That wasn't something that crossed their minds because they weren't interested in ideology. It was a fight for survival.
Yeah, I
Now,
got you.
I
Oh,
think that is the difference between the ideological nationalist and the beer hall nationalist. Is that, yeah, and I think what PA is better at catering for is the ideological nationalist.
but they have proved, like, I mean, I will go into some things shortly with the demonstration, but they've done a couple now, haven't they? Like, and I'm very impressed with the numbers turning out. I mean, I know, and I'm going to go into that very shortly about the numbers, but the numbers coming out right now is looking pretty much similar to the EDL days. We haven't seen this in ages. And to be fair, I was actually going to give PA a bit of praise because it seemed like there was a bit of unity there. So do you not think that can happen? A bit of unity between both nationalists going forward.
Yeah, I think PA deserve a lot of credit for the sort of admin and organizational skill with some of these demos, especially the ones that are now getting bigger and bigger. I know they did a lot of organization for the one in Erskine in Scotland as well.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not sure if they helped out, but I know they definitely were at the one in Cannock. But yeah, I think that unity between these two types of nationalists is possible, but it's only possible if one can simultaneously present the struggle in such a way that it is both ideological and existential at the same time. And I know that's a really abstract it's a really abstract thing to sort of say, and it's very hard to articulate it without it seeming like a bit of a cloud cuckoo land comment. But I think what it is the ideological nationalist will follow you if their ideology aligns with yours. The beer hall nationalist will follow you if they trust you. If they trust you, they will then listen to any ideological suggestion that you make. But ideology alone will never be enough to actually win them over because ideology is not what they're looking for. And so I think you've got to, yes, you've got to be ideological, but what's more important than any ideology, in my opinion, is simply demonstrating to normal people that you are capable of being trusted. And by you, I mean you as an entity and you as an organization, etc., etc.
Mm.
You have to demonstrate before you can even talk about ideology. You have to show that, one, you're capable of listening to people rather than just talking to them, and two, demonstrating that you're capable of being trusted.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I mean, obviously, I don't want to be putting you in awkward positions here, but this was a little bit of my problem because I thought everything came to. I watched the live stream till pretty much halfway through the speeches. I had to go out, but the marches went absolutely amazing. By the way, you should be so proud of yourself, and we'll delve out into that more shortly. But it was the post afterwards that left a bit of taste in my mouth. Same as Paris. I'm not going to go into all those voice notes, but there's voice notes out there from her. There's a few other sources messaging me. It's up to you how much you want to go into it. But the fact they're making posts and going on stream saying, yeah, 400, 500 have attended the biggest PA demonstration going, that is where I think, you know what, that's where you've gone wrong. In my opinion, you're trying to claim that as your whole event, where as if all these working class have come out to see you. Whereas, like, I would have more respect for them if they said, like, many groups come together. You don't have to say, oh, there was 20 PA, 30 PA, 50 PA, however, name all the groups individually. Just saying, like, a collective of groups came together. It was a massive British demonstration against mass migration to our nation or whatever. I mean, what do you have any thoughts on what I just said?
Well, I'm not going to criticize, because I think that the day went well and nothing went wrong, and everybody achieved what I think they wanted to achieve. So I think everybody deserves credit. I think everybody that went and every organization that went deserves credit for what happened in Skegness. I think PA deserve credit for the organization of the speeches and the way everything was set up. I think they deserve credit for that, and I think the gentleman who was the organizer deserves credit for the way in which he organized the march, and he did all of the work necessary to make that a success. And all these other people who promoted it and who managed to get the numbers up. I think the march definitely picked up people as it went down the street, because it seemed to be at the end, it took so long for it to file into the park. I think it definitely picked up numbers on the way.
Interesting. Right, I'm gonna read out two comments here, right? Because these are public comments, by the way. This is not done in private. So these are two comments, and I'll read this one first. This is part of a long comment from Laura Towler, the self-proclaimed host of the demonstration. So it's just part of it, by the way. I don't need to read the rest. For the record, I'm hearing from the locals they didn't like the military direction the protests went in. They said they're just normal families, and they're not about that. Now, I'm bringing this up to you. I'm not bringing up any Paris voice note because that's secondhand. But this, for me, is sort of discussing your march, your organised march with Scott was his name. So that is why I am telling you that comment from Laura.
Well, in all fairness, what I did want to have was I would have ideally, if there, depending on the numbers of veterans or ex-military people there, I would have loved to have had them like actually marching at the front. But you can't always have the best thing you want to have. That was the best case scenario, but on the day, I think the way it was organised with the banners in sequence and then a flag front and centre. I mean, I don't think people. I've not heard anybody criticise that myself. I've not heard anyone say to me or to Scott that they thought that was bad in any way. I think it looked really good personally. I've not heard any criticism of that. I mean, I'm not saying what Laura said is untrue. It may well be true, but I've just not personally heard any criticism or anything saying that they weren't happy with that.
Fair comment.
I mean, the guy who organised it is practically a local, so he's probably best placed to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it looked good on the stream. I weren't there to judge the whole thing. I didn't get a sense that it was like a military direction. I don't know, but it seemed to all went off pretty well, to be fair. And just one last comment. Obviously, I could have went through loads today. There's been quite a lot on Telegram, but these I see this is directed at you, which is why I want your response. Well, partly you, and obviously Scott isn't here to argue his point. So this one guy is always defending PA everywhere he goes. Community doesn't exist, and if one does, it's predicated on liberalism. Also, they are easily subverted and shut down. I wouldn't trust any so-called local community to lead anything. It's good that PA are there. No one else could lead and teach the locals how to organise and counter the tricks of the media, far-left activists and the regime. I respectfully disagree with you, which is a comment of as Kate. But I just think this is very disrespectful to the 380 plus that turned up and organised a fantastic march. And I'm sure if PA weren't in attendance, there'd have been a fantastic after events as well. But also, I'll give PA credit with the little stage and the speeches, so fair play on that. But it's these kind of comments. I'm hearing it from several sources. By the way, bro, beyond that was there in attendance.
I mean,
they're getting a bit annoyed with these kind of comments.
So I don't know who that. I've seen that comment. I don't know who that person is. So I don't know whether they're speaking for themselves. I don't think they're speaking for PA when they say that. But if I'm going to respond to that personal comment, I think that's a ridiculous mentality. I think that's a pretentious mentality, and to sort of believe that normal people aren't capable of doing things is an absolutely diabolical point of view. Because at the end of I'm not saying that comment represents PA, because I don't think it does, but I don't know who that person is, but that is the mentality of failure. Because if one is to take the view that everybody other than oneself is inferior, then politically one is screwed. Because at the end of the day, and this is something I say, and I'll continue to say, and I'll continue to advocate. If you want people to trust you and you want people to follow you, then the easiest way to do it is to worry less about using them to help achieve what you want, and to instead worry about helping them achieve what they want. If you can do that, they will think the world of you. What they won't like is to sort of feel, and I'm not saying anyone's trying to do it, but if their perception is that they've been taken advantage of, they will never do anything for you again. And when people say things, and again, I'm not saying they represent any organization when they're saying this, because I don't even know who this individual is. But when people say things like, well, you're not capable of doing anything, I don't know how they can then seriously expect that person to ever want to listen to them.
Yeah. Same, mate. I'm happy with the answers you gave going forward. So obviously you've left PA, you've moved on. What's the plan going forward then?
Well,
are you going to have a specific name, a group, or you just do it as activists across the country?
Well, I won't go into too much detail on this, because things are still in motion, and discussions are still being had, and I'm not going to sort of prematurely say that I'm committing to something, because it also depends what other people want to do. But I'm definitely not resigning from politics in any way whatsoever. In fact, I'll probably carry on doing even more in it. But yeah, I won't necessarily go into too much more detail, because think that it will become apparent reasonably soon. That there will be other things coming up. There will be other events coming up. So it won't be the last time I'm seen either.
Yeah, I mean, have we got any demonstrations planned coming up, Ali?
Well, I was going to go to the one in Dover. I know that's up in the air now.
I mean, like, I am gonna. I want to discuss this actually. Go on.
I was going to say other ones I'm aware are happening are. I'm aware that there's another one in Cannock. I'm aware that there is another one in Hull. I'm aware that there is another one in Newcastle I've heard about at some point in the future, and there are others going to be coming out. Yeah, so I will probably go to as many of those as I can.
Yeah. So on the Dover one, as that is coming up Saturday, that is coming up this Saturday. Obviously, there was a post put out, I believe, Active Patriots set up. Reading between the lines, I think he actually has done the right thing for himself by distancing himself from that, because if it does kick off, he's the one individual in charge of that demo, and everything will come down on him. But I think it's a bit unfair. I've seen a few people slagging him off. Oh, you're a pussy, you're this, like thinking about himself. At the end of the day, me and him have had a few Barneys in the past, but I absolutely agree with his decision to pull out. But it doesn't mean you can pull out. There's still a group going. Bubba Kate actually shared a group earlier, and there's loads still discussing going. But on the plus side, I think it's probably beneficial now that it's under no group name. I know the media paint it as a PA demo. I don't think it's to do with PA. Active was the individual behind it, and obviously, if it did all kick off, he would ultimately get the blame and probably butt thrown at him. So I think he's probably done the sensible decision. However, there is still many that's got hotel books, travel books, that are still discussing on taking part in a static demonstration, to my believing. Over to you.
Yeah, I agree with you in that I understand why he's done that, because of the nature of it, and I think the fact that there was going to be a march, the fact that there's lefties, whatever it be, I do understand why he can't put himself as the organizer of that, because he's already in, and he's been in the crosshairs of the police for quite some time. So I do understand and sympathize why he couldn't then be the organizer of that. So I'm not critical of him for doing that at all. And at the end of the day, it can still go ahead whether he's personally there or not. I don't necessarily know which people / groups are going. So like, I honestly don't. So I can't.
I think it's just. I think it's just a number of activists that are talking together, whether they're from PA. I think Paris is still going. I just seen a group there advertised earlier. I just seen numerous like independent nationalists really all discussing going. So it's going to be under no group name, and I think that's the way to go about these things. To be honest, don't put them under a group name. Just go as individuals.
Yeah, I think it's fine. It's good that people are doing things together without necessarily trying to step on each other's toes. I've got no objection to that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that will do us, Alek. We'll just go to some final thoughts and anything you want to plug, mate. Please do. It'd be great to get a part 2 of you in a few months after we've done a few more demonstrations or whatever. Obviously, I've told you that I'm not going to be taking part in anything until my trial's over. I've got work as well. I'm trying to keep clean and traveling abroad as well at the time. So my activism is going to be just a few streams and maybe a couple of videos in the meantime. But yeah, over to you. Final thoughts from you, mate. Anything you want to plug, please do.
I don't think I have anything to plug at this time.
Oh, you got a Telegram channel. That's another thing.
Yeah.
What you need to do, bro, you need to get onto Telegram. Start building that up. TikTok as well. Some of your speeches, even like if you just get a certain edit to it, man. Like when I was first on TikTok, I was getting 20,000-30,000 views, and you're a lot better speaker than me, bro. Like honestly, if you want help, I'll help you as well. But,
that's I very much appreciate that. A lot of my speeches prior to Skegness, the PA guys did a lot of the editing for, and there's some very, very skilled, very, very talented people in there that were very, very good at sound editing and video editing. So a lot of credit to them for them.
Yeah, much credit to just to them in general. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. But yeah, go and follow you on Telegram. I think it's Alek. Speeches.
Alek Yerbury speeches.
Alek Yerbury speeches on Telegram. Have you got a YouTube channel or?
No, I haven't. I think if I did, it would probably just get taken down. So
yeah, especially looking like that, mate. I'm only joking. Alek, it's been an absolute pleasure, bro. Let's do a part two very, very soon. Let's get a few more demos and we can review some of your future work. Again, like I just want to say thank you for you guys that went to the march, and even obviously PA doing the speeches. It looked absolutely impressive. So fair play to everyone that attended. That was big numbers. That'll probably be worrying the establishment a little bit more than some of the previous demos that's happened in recent times. But yeah, thank you, Alek.
No, it was a pleasure to be on, and thank you for having me on.
Okay, guys, thank you very much for tuning in. Please, if you've missed episode 2, that was with Katie Fanning, aka Paris, the first episode, Highland Division. Hope you've all had a good night. Please, let's get some love and respect for the main man, Alek, in the chat, guys. See you later. Peace out.